Hello, I'm Mark Unkefer, and this is 21 This Week. Coming up next, Maryland Democratic nominee Ben Jealous' single-payer health plan is pegged to cost $24 billion, and it's coming under fire. As the Board of Elections recount confirms Mark Elrich's primary victory, the Montgomery County executive race shapes up to be a three-way contest with Elrich, Robin Ficker, and Nancy Florine. Shares of Facebook took the biggest one-day drop in market capitalization ever, a $120 billion loss. Has Facebook gotten too big, and what does it mean for us? Our panel of insiders will give you the story behind the story. We're joined by the Dean of Democratic Punditry, Sam Statland, Sean Winkler, political strategist, transportation and railway consultant Phil Bell, and political strategist and all-around Montgomery County maven, Susan Heltemes. Stay tuned for these stories and more on 21 This Week next. In the race for governor, Ben Jealous made his support for a state single-payer health insurance plan a signature issue in the primary. But now Republicans are trying to make the cost, pegged at $24 billion, into a political liability. Sam, pushing a health plan helped Jealous in the Democratic primary, but now that he's under fire for its cost, should Jealous stick with the issue or change the subject?
He should definitely change the subject. First of all, his plan was ill-conceived. Secondly, he asked legislative services to cost out the plan. They gave a bulk figure of the $24 billion. It's not even close to that. And thirdly, the plan we had before the Affordable Care Act here in Maryland under Maryland health reform is what we should go back to. And I know for a fact that major players in the state of Maryland would go that way. You know, when you run in the Democratic primary, you run to the left. And I think all the candidates now will move more toward the center.
Phil, a number of Maryland Democratic senators are facing tough re-election races in districts Larry Hogan won 4 years ago. How will that single-payer price tag affect their chances?
I think it'll affect them a lot. And in fact, there was a great article out there that said basically outlined a lot of the different ways that these taxes could be imposed to pay for this health care plan. And one example said for a $100 pair of shoes, it would add an additional $30. So think about whenever your Montgomery County folks are going out to buy a nice pair of wingtips or Manolo Blahniks, whatever it is, and you're adding an extra $30, $40, $50, $60 to that. To pay for this, things start to get ridiculous. And that's going to show a lot of these folks are considering to go ahead and vote for the same Democratic senator they've been voting for. No, you know what? I'm going to support Larry Hogan, give him what it is that he needs, and that's going to help the Republicans get where they need to be.
Susan, many Montgomery County residents, especially government workers, have more generous health care plans than a single-payer planned coverage. So how will, and much of the savings too from the that are purported for the plan comes from providing a single level of coverage. So are people willing to give up their Cadillac plans for the greater good?
I'm not willing to talk for anyone yet at this point about what insurance policy they're going to give or not give up. The numbers that have been out here thus far are way off target, and I think we need to let everything settle down for a little bit, give them a couple of weeks, and let them get a true cost. But I know that the Republicans are concerned about this, and there is a Republican Governors Association independent expenditure working for Hogan. And what's interesting is it's raised over $1 million, 21 individuals and companies. Only one individual company is Bell's Florist or whatever, Flowers, Bell Flowers. And of that $1 million, $300,000 has come from healthcare providers and health entities. I think they're afraid of this and they're kicking in money. Again, all of them except for Magnum, Dale Magnum, are from outside of Maryland. And I think that gives us an indication of what Republicans are really thinking. And the irony also is that every single provider who has put together the ads and worked on it are all outside of the state of Maryland. So Larry Hogan, who thinks that he cares about Maryland and is Maryland's governor, if you start pulling back the sheets, there's all sorts of interesting things there, and I don't think he is as great for the state of Maryland as what they think.
Well, Susan, let me ask you a question. Lee, I want to back up one thing that you kind of went over really quickly there. You said that we need to let the dust settle and I guess figure it out. So are you saying that Ben Jealous proposed this massive plan?
No,
didn't have any idea what it cost?
No, that's
what it sounds like.
That's not what I said. Ben Jealous has a plan. Everybody on every side says that it has not been costed out correctly. And everyone is saying you have to go back to the drawing boards, and reconstitute the cost. So I'm not willing.
Marylanders trust the state to Ben Jealous if he didn't take the time to do this in the first place.
I think that it is a great idea, and sometimes with great ideas that people jump into it. And I think that anyone who throws something out in a primary invariably goes back to the drawing board, whether it's Democrat or Republican. Sam was right. Democrats move to the left, Republicans move to the right. Although I think it's also ironic that you wonderful conservative Republicans, that the Republican Governors Association, actually coming from them, the commercial they put out, I don't know if you've seen it, but you would think Larry Hogan is a Democrat based on that commercial. They talk about his health care, his education, is this. He is not a typical Republican.
The two lowest and most effective health care plans in the state of Maryland, used by more people than anyone else. Well, actually, there's three of them. Number one, Medicaid. Number two, Social Security, especially here in Montgomery County. Number three, the federal employees' health care and state and municipal governments plans.
But you mean Medicare, not Social Security. You mean Medicare.
Medicare,
right.
Medicare. And Jealous's plan, it just doesn't take any of this into consideration. He's got to step back and he's got to reformulate. And if I were him, I'd move to a different issue.
Well, Susan brought up, the nature of Hogan's, funding coming from out of state. Jealous's health care plan is coming from out of state. I mean, look at Jealous's backers. We're talking national political figures. He was an organizer for Bernie Sanders. In my opinion, he's clueless about the needs of our state. And I think he really needs to do his homework and put together a real plan.
Susan, you said that out-of-state money, he raised the issue of a lot of money for Ben Jealous came from out of state, certainly more than Rusher and Baker. So is that a...
Rusher and Baker had 17% out of state only.
And Jealous
and
had...
if you'll recall, he lost. That is part of the issue that Ben, and Democrats who are candid will admit this, Ben Jealous does have an issue. That is an issue that he is going to have to face. A great deal of his money did come from out of state. And in that point, he is not the governor of New York. He is not the governor of California. He wants to be the governor of Maryland. So he needs to come up with a message. If he is confronted with this, he has to be candid. He has got to be honest about it. And if you look at what 45 is facing in the White House, you will find out if you're not forward and you're not candid, you start digging a hole deeper and deeper. And I think he is going to do that.
Listen, the money in this plan, the money that he got, the man wants to run for governor. He was up against a really well-funded campaign with a more local politician with a better reputation in 4 of the 5 major jurisdictions. He needed the money to have a successful campaign. He went where the money is. More power to him.
Let me come back to Sam. You mentioned the federal employee plan, which has a lot of options and people make choices and make adjustments to that. Sean, you remember that if you like the plan you have, you can keep it. Do you think Marylanders are ready to give up the kind of choices that they use?
I think Marylanders just saw how the ACA was rolled out in the state. We remember a website that was broken, broken promises on plans and keeping coverage. I don't think Marylanders are ready for this, radical change that's being proposed from an out-of-state candidate.
So what he's proposing is better than, for Maryland residents, the Affordable Care Act. Getting that legislation through with all of his bells and whistles and his cost containments, just not going to work. What he should do is, as I've said before, is go back to Maryland health care reform. The major differences between Maryland healthcare reform and the ACA was, number one, a child could stay on the parent's plan for 2 years longer. That was really the major big-time difference. Other than that, it's a loser.
Vangelis hired
Sam, you got the last word there. And we'll be back after this break.
I think Sam.
Welcome back. This week, the Board of Elections recount confirmed Mark Elrich's narrow Democratic primary win as Councilmember Nancy Florine geared up for a run as an independent. Now, that would set up a three-way race with Republican Robin Ficker. Susan, I know you're probably not going to support Robin Ficker, but how about Nancy Florine? We've never had a woman as county executive. How about Nancy?
First of all, I take umbrage at the fact you assume I'm going to support Nancy Florine because she's a woman. I think that it is wrong to assume that women are going to support women. I think the important question is, what does Nancy have that the other candidates don't have, Mark? And first of all, she's got to get the 6,000 signatures. I know Robin Ficker, 7244.
Which means in reality 14,000.
Well, and as you know, Robin Ficker put out there, he signed the petition. So her first challenge, by I believe it's August 6th, is to get the signatures. Assuming that passes, and I'm sure it will, she is going to be there. And I believe that Nancy Florine has qualifications neither of the other gentlemen have. She has a planning background, and no one in this county now has a planning background on the county councilor in the exec race. She has experience leading the council. It is executive experience. The other two don't have that. And she has been around. She was the mayor of Garrett Park. She served on park and planning. When I first entered the spectrum of being engaged in Silver Spring, she was on the Silver Spring Advisory Board with me. Her background is plentiful. She is articulate. She is known as someone that is congenial and works well with everyone. It's going to be an interesting race.
It will be.
As far as I'm concerned, she is a definite turncoat. All of the accolades that you just paid to her were as a Democrat in Montgomery County. Mm-hmm. What happened was she knew that she couldn't beat Mark, nor anybody else in the primary, so she decided not to run. And her chosen candidate, David Blair, everyone thought with all the money that was poured into this campaign by all the oligarchs in Montgomery County, were there. And what did they do? They still lost by 77 votes. Florine will lose this race. She's no longer a Democrat. She doesn't deserve the respect of Democrats.
Nancy
and as far
supported
as I'm
Rose
the support
Krasna.
of any Democrat.
She supported Rose Krasna.
Sean, I think we just heard how divided the Democrats in Montgomery County are. And, you know, whether you agree with Robin Ficker or not, he's about as well known in Montgomery County as anyone. And term limits passed with 70% of the vote, and that actually did prevent Mark Elrich and Nancy from running for re-election. Could Robin Ficker win this?
I mean, I think Democrats would be silly not to take him seriously this go around. I mean, as we've just seen, you know, the party is still struggling to come together. We have Elrich, you know, touting his support from the Democratic Socialists, not the Democratic Party. And I think Ficker is well known, as you mentioned. He's proven he can get something done for the county, and we just saw what happened with the presidential election on the Republican side. Name ID matters, and a great saying matters. Robin delivers for you. Simple, easy. You know, I think it's going to resonate.
You know,
he's still going to lose.
Well, I think there's something else that's important to look at here. A lot of what you described as being attributes for Nancy are things that are absolute negatives, I think, in the minds of a lot of voters. A planning background, are we really happy with the way that the planning has been done? Number one. And number two, the way the council's been led and all that's going on, that directly led to the term limits. So why embrace all of that? But again, you as a Democratic partisan had nothing negative to say, and I hear what Sam said, so absolutely, you're right. Take Robin Ficker very seriously.
Well, and I think, Phil, you need to understand, I have not talked to a single Republican who said they're going to vote for Robin Ficker. And my circles are, you know, they go out there, and I have tentacles in the community, and they're not voting for him. They understand, yes, he got that pass, but it was pent-up energy. I cannot imagine, and, you know, I will eat a hat if he wins on this
But
show.
not my hat.
All right.
You can't eat my hat. I know you want to.
I'll bring my own hat.
That would be a Make American Great Again
That's right,
hat.
yes.
Phil,
and that would choke me to death.
Phil, last week the Washington Post ran a story headline that Mark Elridge promised to fulfill the commitments that Montgomery County made to Amazon for its second headquarters. Now, the Post is owned by Amazon CEO Jeff Bezos. Was that a conflict of interest?
Well, going back, there's been a long history of newspapers that have had, interesting ownership. You go back to the Philadelphia Inquirer, and they had an owner at one point who was a big Nixon fan, so he did everything he could to promote Richard Nixon. But I don't think this was, as much as I'd like to take the opportunity to hit Bezos and the WashPo and Mark Elridge. I don't think it was. I think it's something noteworthy. Here's a guy that's likely to be the next county executive. County executive. Here's a guy that's a situation that obviously the county cares about and the paper covers. So him making that statement, that's not a conflict of interest.
It was a very astute thing to do. It showed that Mark can move from the right to a more centrist position, and all the people that are out there yelling and screaming, oh, he's the worst thing for this county. The county's going to suffer. He's going to ruin the tax base, and yada, yada, yada. And what does Mark do? Very, very smart. He goes to one of the biggest potential income sources in the county and says, I'm with you guys.
Again, you get the last word. So now we'll move on to Facebook. This past week, Facebook stock dropped by 20%, $120 billion. That's the biggest one-day drop ever for by market capitalization. And in politics, it has a role with the news portal is getting more scrutiny. Phil, some Facebook critics are saying that they should block Fox News as a news site or at least identify it as a questionable source. What do you think?
Well, only if they're going to identify CNN and the New York Times and the Washington Post and all the other left-wing sites as questionable sources.
MSNBC.
Definitely MSNBC. I am surprised, having watched a video of Facebook executives saying, hey, you know what, we're going to identify whether it's InfoWars or Fox News as somehow questionable or we should do this. No, part of the reason why that was created is because it was a great forum for people to come along and interact with each other. And if you like a news story, you, the users, decide if it's questionable or not and do your own research. That's because we're thinking adults. This whole conversation of them doing it is ridiculous.
Sam, what do you think? Should one company have so much power in terms of screening the news outlooks that Americans look at?
What caused the drop in their stock was really three-pronged. I can remember two of them. Number one, they have put no effort into security of securing their site. They're spending millions of dollars to secure the site. That was the major reason their stock dropped. Number two, I don't believe that anybody should regulate the news. I think it's up to the consumer to be intelligent enough to see what they're doing. But when it comes to revealing sources, that's where you have a problem, and I have a problem with Facebook. So I think that their stock's going to be back where it was once they get through the security issues, once they get through to revealing sources, and obviously the public loves them until another competitor comes up.
Well, Susan, some candidates for Attorney General in other states are saying that there should be antitrust action taken against Facebook, but also Google, because these companies have grown too powerful in our society. Do you think it's time for that kind of action?
I think we have one of the finest attorney generals in the country, and I'm sure he's looking at that. Although the Republican attorney generals of America think that they're going to defeat him, they will be sorely mistaken. But anyway, I personally don't do Facebook. I think it's stupid, and there is no reason for it. There are a couple of reasons that people are dropping out right and left, and that's one of their biggest problems. People are dropping out. And secondly, with what happened in the last election, with the Republicans meddling and with bad sources on Facebook that came out of nowhere or came out of Russia somewhere, they have a real issue. But ironically today, Twitter's stock crashed too, and people are dropping out of Twitter.
For the same reason.
That's a question.
Republican meddling?
People are worried about their personal material being out there.
Well, it isn't.
I disagree with that completely.
It isn't only
That's why
that.
they're
Put it there. You put it there.
No, you don't have to put it there.
You don't have to, but you've chosen to do it. That's why it's there. The reason why the stock is dropped is investors have said, wait a second, we know at some point people are going to find something else.
Right.
And there's always the fear when people leave, maybe they found something else. And from what I've heard, talking to parents, younger people, they're moving on to other platforms like Snapchat and Instagram, where it's just a different form, as opposed to they're still putting info.
But the cost went, I mean, the stock went down when Mark Zuckerberg said, we are investing millions and millions in security.
So and that's where are going to be dropped.
Okay, you guys, that's the last word, and stay tuned for parting shots. Welcome back, and now with parting shots, we'll start with Sam.
Well, first of all, ladies and gentlemen, I want to really congratulate Mark Elridge for winning this race. And I think he will go on to defeat this turncoat, Nancy Florine, in the general election. But the biggest thanks has to go out to his biggest strength, which were the thousands of people, grassroots people, that decided they wanted a change in government and that Mark could deliver that change. And more power to you folks that supported him.
Well, on the opposite side of the spectrum, a lot of candidates lost last month. And I would just say to them that politics is a game of phoenixes. Look at Prince George's County with Anthony Brown, devastating defeat in the gubernatorial just to rise the next cycle. If you're a first-time candidate, don't give up. There's a lot of opportunity.
Phil.
Earlier this week, just to switch gears big time, the State Department held its ministerial on religious freedom in Washington, D.C., and that brought a lot of attention to something that one of our fellow panelists here on 21, Nick Lee Ambrose, has been working very hard on, which is the question of the Rohingya and the religious minorities in Burma. There's a lot going on there, a lot of oppression, people dying in some of the most horrible ways. So I encourage you, please take a look at that online, do whatever you can to help, and thank you for your attention to this cause.
Susan.
All right. I think it's really unfortunate that 21 This Week is going off the air for the summer. And I do, first of all, wish everybody a happy August and a happy birthday to me. I won't be here, so you can't throw a birthday party for me. But anyway, there are a lot of things going on that we need to track, and this summer is one of them. First of all, the first 3 months of this year, there have been 500 fentanyl deaths in the state of Maryland, which is just downright disgusting. In that, and last year there were 72 in Maryland, and in 2017, Maryland came in 6th with the most number of fentanyl deaths. So that's something, and Larry Hogan has done a lot of great things, but I think he has fallen short on dealing with opioids and drugs, etc. So that's something we could be watching. Again, as we just said, Nancy Florine isn't in the primary yet, so we have to watch that carefully. As we talked a little bit earlier, the governor's race is going to be most interesting, and it'll be interesting to see how both of them make their messages for the campaign. But most of all, I wish we were here this summer to discuss what's going on at the White House. It is just unbelievable, and every day we turn around, and today there are supposedly more women who are now going to come forward and say that they've been paid off by 45, and it goes on and on. And as you watch the news come around, 45, I talked about it earlier, lying only gets you into trouble. And I would love to be here this month to talk about what is happening in Washington, of course, what's going on in Annapolis, and what's going on in Montgomery County. So even if we're not here, pay attention. If you see us on the street, I'd be more than happy to talk to you. And if you're having an outdoor barbecue and you want someone to come, invite me. I'll be glad to spread the word.
Susan, but what we do know is that you're not available on either Facebook or Twitter.
Nope.
So the reason that you weren't liking the show was, well, you weren't on the show. You weren't on Facebook. But for everybody else out there, we encourage you to like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter, and also follow our MC Media, which is a great outlet, which will be following a lot of these stories very intensely during the next month, and will give people a lot of insight on what's going on. So thank you all, and this is 21 This Week. Thank you.